Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about how to find meaning and purpose in life. Now, are you struggling to get motivated, excited, or enthused about your life? Maybe everything just seems a little bit dull, a drag, and like you are just going through the motions, but not really experiencing any kind of joy. Or maybe you have reached some kind of deeper existential crisis and angst, and you're wondering what on earth life is all about. Well, if you can relate to any of these scenarios, this teaching is going to be for you. We'll be discussing what causes these unhelpful feelings and negative patterns of thinking, and how you can begin today, right now, to turn things around so you can start living with much greater meaning, purpose, joy, and fulfillment in your life. Okay, David. So typically when a client comes to you struggling with this issue of lacking meaning and purpose in their life, what are they presenting you with?
Well, it's what I call in my model, Alex, the carousel of despair. They're going round and round and they have no direction. And they're constantly looking outside of themselves for other people to give them validation, to give them approval, to give them a sense of direction. But of course, they have a problem because everybody they meet or everybody that's close to them has a different idea for them. And so they're constantly going down one road, maybe a career, then changing career, maybe picking a certain partner and finding out that's not suitable. Maybe something as simple as what they're wearing or how they're looking or where they're living. So they'll never be grounded because what they're doing, they're kind of not taking accountability. And this is very important for me. This is such a good question because most of our videos, we talk about the inner child and we mention Shen. This teaching will be concentrating more on Shen with mentioning the inner child, because I want to really delve into and make you understand why Shen is so important in your life.
And so for new viewers, what do you mean by Shen, David?
Well, Shen is my word that I would use. Most people would use the word spirituality. I always shy away from that word a little bit because it leads into religion or angels or crystals. And I'm not saying anything of that. That's why I prefer to use the Chinese word of Shen. Shen is your unique spirit. It's that if you think about someone you really love and care for, say a child, and if I asked you to describe that child, you would give me the color of their hair, how tall they are, how they talk, how they walk, maybe. And then if I said to you, is that all they are, the physical? You'd say, no, they're far more than that. And there's this part of us that is not physical. It's this intuition, this inner knowing, this inner sense of what I would call Shen. And so what people are trying to do when they're looking for meaning is they're looking outside of themselves for someone to give them meaning, but they will never be satisfied instead of looking internally and finding the meaning within them.
But this, I guess, culmination of negative thinking, existential crisis, lacking purpose, does it typically happen kind of slowly over time, or is it like one life event triggers it? Is it kind of like a midlife crisis thing, or can it affect clients, people of any age, or either sex?
Well, there's a bit of both there, Alex, because it's different for everyone, because everyone is unique. But in general, if you want me to talk in general, it starts in childhood. This is what I said. This will be talking more about Shen with the idea of the inner child. So it starts in childhood, and it's the inner child part of your mind always looking for authority, not wanting to be accountable, not wanting to be self-sufficient, not taking self-responsibility. And the main reason for that is not wanting to be what we call in our model CC Jade. For those new people, CC Jade means criticized, compared, or judgmental. So what they're trying to do is to create a life where someone else is guiding them and telling them what to do. But of course, they'll never be totally satisfied following somebody else's path. And they're not taking accountability or responsibility for grounding themselves in what is right for them. And that's what should be Shen. Shen for me, if I were in my teachings, when I'm working with clients, if I say to you to get a really good sense of your Shen is truth, honesty, and integrity. Many of my clients will make decisions based on their emotional feelings and experiences rather than looking at a situation or something as important as your purpose in life, your meaning of life. What is your meaning of life? Have you ever sat down, dropped your shoulders, and taken a breath? Is it just the story that the inner child has created, whatever that story is, the victim mode, everyone's against me, I can't cope, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy or I'm unlovable, all those lies. You see, so when you run the inner child scripts of the story and the lies, you're far away from the Shen, truth, honesty, and integrity.
So I'm thinking this story concept that our inner child, our ego hooks onto is really becomes really important for us as adults, you know, how we define ourselves, how we believe other people view us, and then this thing about getting validation and feedback and praise and strokes from other people. So that could be, you know, a successful business person, that could be a successful, loving father or mother, that could be a great host or hostess, all sorts of roles that we kind of assign ourselves and then we look for feedback from others on. And I can see how changes in our life. So we can run this system and it'll work to a point, but then lifestyle changes, so changing jobs, changing career, retiring, children leaving home, falling out with friendship groups, all of a sudden our kind of role and identity and the validation gets undermined. It's like the system that our ego and inner child has constructed for us to sustain our sense of purpose and meaning starts to crumble.
That's right, because the inner child is always looking externally outside of themselves for somebody to give that value and worth. And when you're connected and grounding in Shen, isn't it the truth? Isn't it honest? And isn't it integrity that your value and your worth is not a commodity? It's not something that somebody can give you or take away from you. Now, the inner child part of your mind will be fighting that and will be looking always outside. So all of those examples that you've just given, your career, the inner child part of your mind will always be on, you could do better, comparing yourself. Look what they're doing. They've got a bigger car. They've got a bigger house. They look happier than me. They're thinner than me. They're this, they're that, they're the other. And this is the problem. When you focus on your inner child and you ground yourself in your emotions, you're swinging farther and farther away from your truth and honesty and integrity, the Shen of who you are, that real deep down inner knowing and inner knowledge that you should be grounding yourself in and living yourself from that base, from that grounding.
I think, David, a lot of people listening to this, though, would say, okay, I've kind of got a sense of what you mean by Shen. But the problem is my my ego roles, my inner child roles that I've been living my life through, which are now failing and falling apart, they were quite well defined. They're quite well defined in my in our society, our culture. And I could see day to day what I needed to do to meet the standard, excel in these roles. So there's a kind of like, well, there's a meat on the bones though of the meaning and the purpose and the identity that those sort of roles gave me or give me, or I thought gave me. What you're saying is those roles are shifting sands because they are very hooked into external approval, validation. So why not reconnect to our Shen, our spiritual nature, our truth, our honesty, our true integrity? Lose the kind of labels, lose the image. But the concept of Shen for most people seems very fuzzy, very vague. It's not as kind of clearly defined in our society or culture. It's like, who does this mean I am? What am I? Who am I? And what does it mean I do day to day if I choose to align with my Shen rather than my inner child roles?
Well, that's confusing, because then if you're aligning to your inner child role, and that's failing, and that's always failed, and that has just looking outside of yourself and trying to gauge yourself on what other people think about you or talk about you, always looking for that validation, always searching, that's force, and that has no integrity, that has no honesty, and that has no truth. And so surely you're grounding yourself in what most of my clients will unfortunately ground themselves in emotions. All they're saying is, I feel this, I feel vulnerable, I feel anxious, I feel overwhelmed. And what they're doing, they're grounding themselves in the falseness, in the lies of the inner child. And even though the story is there, Alex, the truth is it's never been successful. That's the truth.
Well, I think a lot of people would say, actually, it did work for me. It did work while I was raising my children. I did have a sense of meaning and purpose. While I was climbing the career ladder, I did have a sense of purpose. While I was hooked into this particular project and very driven with it and let it consume me, I did have a sense of meaning and purpose. But now that's gone. So a lot of people, I guess, would struggle to accept the idea that it's never worked.
Well, if it's worked, then you're always relying on something else. So if it worked, it would still be there now. So if it's a project or a career and the career changes and then you lose your sense of purpose, you're always looking to hook your sense of purpose onto something else outside of you. You're always being dragged along by whatever that project, as you say, or that looking for validation or doing something, or you're always looking outside of yourself for somebody to give you that stamp of approval instead of looking inside of yourself. I mean, would you say, you could do the Shen test here, and would you say to your child or to your nephew, your sense of purpose, your role in life is to run a project, is to be successful at one thing and then that changes and be successful at something else? They're just trying to do one thing and then running onto something else and then running onto something else instead of looking for that sense of purpose and worth inside of themselves.
I think that I'm wondering whether, David, that it's okay and it's quite natural and it's a good thing to get satisfaction and contentment and challenge yourself with roles and to fulfill roles well, whether that's being a parent, a project manager, a great friend to a friend in need. But I'm kind of sensing what you're saying here is that should be like the cherry on top of the cake, but that your greater sense of knowing who you are, your purpose, and what life is all about needs to be built on more solid, sustainable ground that will always be there regardless of what you're doing day to day, where your energy and focus is day to day, that we need to have this solidity, this inner knowing about our purpose and identity.
Well, I would say use a slightly different word, Alex. As I would say, all of those things that you've mentioned are temporary. Mm-hmm. They're all passing. So if you're temporarily looking for something to give you a sense of purpose, you're never going to take the accountability or the self-responsibility to follow your dreams, to be who you want to be, because you're always people-pleasing and putting others in front of you. And everything that you mentioned there are very important, but you shouldn't be grounded in those, because those are temporary. They will go maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 5 years, but they will pass. And then what are you left with? You're left with then looking around for something else to fill the hole. And so constantly you haven't got this innate grounding of sense of purpose and worth and value about yourself, because you're always looking outside of yourself and not building your life on temporary things that are happening and identifying yourself with that temporary thing.
And I think, David, we talked a lot about looking to other people for validation in these roles, but I'm kind of guessing a lot of people would say, well, hold on, actually, this is about me proving myself to myself. But wouldn't that also be because you believe you're not good enough? So you're a disappointment, that you need to prove your worth to yourself. Isn't that almost like a false driver as well?
It's absolutely a false driver, because then you've moved out of truth, honesty, and integrity. Because if you have to prove your worth, that must mean that you don't believe you have worth. How can you prove something that you already got? As I say on many videos, when you came into this world in the delivery room, the midwife didn't hold you up to the light and says, quick, can somebody give this infant some worth and value? You intrinsically have worth and value. How can you prove something to yourself, or how can someone else prove something to you that you've already got? And when we're talking about the purpose and the meaning of life, to me, it's almost talking about the same as your value and your worth, because that has to be your accountability and your responsibility, because you've been blessed with this life. This is why I think it's a spiritual teaching. This is why I think it goes above all of the lies and the deceit and the false stories that we get hooked into. This is where we should be grounding ourselves down to our intuition, to our inner knowing. I always say to my clients, you always know what the right thing to do is. But what happens is the inner child comes in and clouds and creates confusion and fogs, and you lose touch with Shen. And if you look in our archives, we've done a Shen meditation. If this is something that interests you, I would really ask you to go and just put the earphones on, listen to that meditation, and just get back connected to that real source of who you are. And that's based on truth, honesty, and integrity. That's not based on what somebody else says or pleasing them or doing something to get something off someone. That's living your life, walking in your footsteps, being in control of what you want to do and making the decisions and getting things wrong and learning from those mistakes. We call it falling off the bike and getting back on the bike as quick as you can, because that strengthens your connection to Shen.
But David, if someone came to you, or if you were giving this teaching to a small child and they came to you and said, you know, David, what's the meaning and purpose of life? What's it all about? How would you explain it to them?
Well, I can tell you, because I did it to my children. I said, never lie. Never lie. Don't lie to your mommy and daddy. Don't lie to your friends. Don't lie to anyone at school. Learn how to deliver the truth. But most importantly, never lie to yourself. They probably, when I taught this, they wouldn't know what the word integrity is. But for me, when I'm teaching integrity to my clients, I say to get a good handle on the word integrity, look at the opposite word, hypocrisy. Don't say one thing and do something else. And this is really what I taught my children. Stand up for yourself. Be proud of yourself. And even if you've done something wrong, own up to it, because then you'll learn the lesson and you'll get it right. Because without teaching them about Shen, that is connecting them to Shen when they can stand proud for what they stand for and not trying to dodge and dive and tell half-truths and white lies and fibbing and all of this, just to stand true within themselves. So when they're speaking to their parents or they're speaking to the teacher, they can stand true and tell them what they actually think and believe, not what other people want them to hear.
And so what I've picked up from that is you've said, in a way, by being truthful, by being honest in that way, that then immediately reconnects us to our Shen, our true essence and wisdom.
Yes.
And once we make that reconnection, are you saying then that we automatically have a focus, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning? It's like life then presents itself in a new way. It's like we change the lenses on our glasses once we're reconnected to Shen. We don't have to ask or consciously think, what should I be doing now? Who should I be now? It's the choices are presented to us and the choices become obvious.
That's exactly right, Alex. But that transition into Shen is not easy because all the time, the part of the mind that we call the inner child, and I hear you occasionally call it the ego or something, that other side of our mind will fight that transition to your Shen, because the inner child will be desperately wanting to hang on to the story, hanging on to the deceit, trying to please people, trying to get their validation, trying to get them worth. Because as we've said in many videos and many teachings, the inner child really is looking for the familiarity of what it's used to. And so as you slowly transition to standing up and walking in your footsteps, the inner child will give you that restriction and that tug of war. But the more you speak your truth, the more you're honest, the more you work and live and think with integrity, and then more you're connected to Shen. And then, as you said, when you get through that transition period that we sometimes call the amber lights where you just kind of refocusing and getting as you quite rightly said, putting a new lens on your glasses. There's a bit of a transition period there. It might be weeks, it might be a month or so. But once you're then connected to Shen, then absolutely your purpose, your way, your vision becomes really clear. You know what you should be doing and you start living your truth. Now, the inner child won't give up, but the inner child's voice gets smaller and smaller and smaller because the power of the Shen, the power of connecting and being in your flow, which is what Wu Wei means, living and being in your flow, reaching your potential. So how many times do you hear me say that in these teachings? Reaching your potential, not somebody else's potential, not living what they want you to do. There's the strength, reaching your potential. You can't do that when you're following somebody else's directions.
And there's a couple of things that come to mind there, David. When, as you say, the inner child will initially resist this departure from having the identity and the validation from the normal roles we've assumed. And it almost will say to us, well, what you're saying is I've just got to drop everything. I've just got to drop my career. I've just got to drop my family situation. I've just got to walk away from it. And of course, that's not what we're saying, because I guess the Shen is also very wise and sensible. It doesn't go to extremes like the inner child does. So the Shen knows that we can experience purpose and meaning and still operate or begin to transition slowly in a sensible, healthy way from some of the roles we have now that we need to maintain and we may want to maintain. But so it's not a kind of an all or nothing transition that we have to reject everything that's gone before and then move to a completely different place, like cut ourselves off from our life as we know it.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction between the inner child and Shen. So the inner child will always see things and the pendulum swinging from, oh my goodness, it means I've got to throw everything away, I've got to finish, all my family's going to leave me, I'm going to get the sack, I'm going to be made redundant, I can't cope, and all of that. That's the inner child talking. And as you quite rightly said, the path of walking your truth with honesty and integrity is much more kind of in your flow, in your Wu Wei, being able to make those adjustments. And perhaps only the ones close to you will notice a change in your linguistic, the language you use, the way you look at your life, the way you make clearer, more thoughtful decisions than just reacting from your emotions. That's a good sign of whether you're connecting to your inner child mind or your Shen. If you're the one that reacts to the emotion, the inner child is in control. If you're more thoughtful, more calm, can consider more about things that are important, career choices, family choices, health choices, this is absolutely then when you consider and make your plan. This is the Wu Wei wisdom. That's what Wu Wei wisdom means, the wisdom of being in your flow. You cannot be in your flow if you're swinging from one side to the other and the inner child's kicking up a stink and going crazy. You can't find that Wu Wei wisdom. And that's what these teachings are about, is to encouraging you to understand that Shen is awesome. And that's who you are. That's what you had at the beginning. That will never leave you. That can't go away or be given to you or somebody take it away. It's there all the time. And what we're trying to do in these teachings is to reconnect you to who you really are. And then your purpose and your meaning is yours. Thank goodness. No one else's. You live your life to your meaning and your purpose, and you take accountability for those decisions and take full responsibility for living in your flow.
Thank you, David. And on a day-to-day basis, I guess, the inner child will resist this. So when we do get those red light feelings of inadequacy, or this is stepping out of my comfort zone, this is not familiar, we know in a way that that's a signal to keep pushing on, to trying new things, to not allowing the emotions to direct us back to the old roles, the need for the validation, the need for that sense of identity, which was kind of built on false promises. And it's like we get a momentum. The more we kind of slowly push ourselves out of our comfort zone with this, we get a momentum, and then we start to experience those green light feelings. And that tells us then, I guess, that we are on the right path. We're on the Shen path to having a true depth of meaning and purpose in life. And I know we use the breadcrumb analogy with the golden thread work, but it's almost like following the trail of breadcrumbs as well with this. Once we start to sense green light feelings in a certain direction, a new direction, then we ought to follow those, because that's leading us towards a new purpose, a new meaning in life that we haven't perhaps explored before.
Yes, and also when the inner child is at its worst and kicking up a stink and creating that internal tug of war and that pulling you and trying to not resist you going on the path of truth, honesty, and integrity, this is also the perfect opportunity to do the inner child reparenting. And we've got many teachings in our archives showing you how to do this. Because remember, as we always say, the inner child is not your enemy. It's not out to sabotage you. It's very blocked and locked up in its way of thinking. And if you do it correctly, with care, with love, from the wisdom of your Shen, then your conversations with your inner child become more loving, more open, more understanding, and the inner child will respond to that as you go through the transition of the change, and the inner child will slowly come on board. But I'm not pretending this is easy and the inner child just surrenders. Because as we've said in many, many teachings, the inner child can be one stubborn, and that's not bad. That's not bad. So you have to be able to educate, talk to the inner child, and convince him that or her that this is a new way forward, where you can reach your true potential, where you can be in your flow, rather than these vicious swinging in your emotions and not getting anywhere and constantly looking outside of yourself for this magic validation to come into you and suddenly everything works out okay, which it never has and it never will.
Yeah, great. Thank you, David. And in addition to the inner child reparenting teachings, I will also put a link to our Shen playlist in the show notes for you. So we've got lots of teachings on what is the Shen and how to live through your Shen as well, which will be really helpful for you. I really hope you've enjoyed this teaching. Please do let us know if you enjoyed it and perhaps share it with someone else who you think would also benefit. David works every week with clients all over the world via Zoom video call on exactly these sort of issues. If you'd like to learn more about David's sessions, I will put a link to learn more in the show notes as well. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.